Welcome back to another edition of Between Two Fars. I'm Warneke Miller, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by Tracy Lee Belford. She has been an attorney here at NASA for almost 30 years. She started at KSC and worked there for a couple of years, and then coast to coast, she went out to Dryden, now Armstrong, and spent several years there supporting that legal office before returning to KSC. And at Kennedy and Dryden, she has done phenomenal work in contract law. She also was one of the first ones to start working commercial law down at Kennedy and has also done some environmental law. We're here with her today because she has got some insights that are really going to help you post-dispute. After you've resolved a contract dispute, you really need to think about going back to the clients and the stakeholders and sharing the lessons learned. And today, Tracy's going to talk to us a little bit about the importance of sharing information about administrative and technical and systemic issues that could be improved in order to avoid future disputes. Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience and the things that you think are fundamentally important in this post-dispute time period?
Doing lessons learned is not a new exercise for anybody who works for NASA. We do it in a lot of technical areas, probably more than on the administrative side, but I recently had a pretty large case. It was over $30 million worth of litigation, and it was pretty complex. And when we ultimately decided to settle that case, part of my agreement with management was that an extensive lessons learned process would be employed with not only with the legal office, but with the procurement office and the technical engineering office, to see if there were things that led or contributed to some of the disputes involved in the case that we could strengthen, correct, change, update for any future projects. And so that's exactly what we did. We spent about 3, maybe 4 weeks after the case because it was so big and there were so many different things involved. And as a group, we came up with probably 140 line items of lessons learned, which we then combined into very specific types of categories of things. And then we actually assigned an action office to each of those lessons learned, because what we discovered is that we had some center-wide problems. And I think we're not unique in that. I think that every center could improve a lot of things, especially with the transition from paper files, and now pretty much everything is digital. And some offices never really made a clean transition in that. And so we ran into a lot of technical things that needed improvement for future projects, just whether there was a dispute or not, but to improve future projects. Some of those things involved like how are they managing documentation now in this digital world? And do they have a file structure that lends itself to finding the modifications and all the supporting documentation all in one place? And what we found was that the contracts office had a set of documents that they needed to keep for the contract, but the technical people had a set of files that were completely different than the procurement files, and they had some of the background documentation, but not all of the back-end documentation. And so that led actually to a lessons learned for both of those offices to take a look at how their engineers and their contracting officers are keeping documentation, and to create a uniform manner in which folders are to be set up for every project. You have to have a certain hierarchy of folders, and certain folders have to contain certain kinds of information. And that was really, I think that will be beneficial going forward.
Now, when there was this disconnect or during the resolution of the dispute, you found that there were differences or errors in the specifications or the plans or the drawings. How were you addressing that in the lessons learned process?
So on the technical side, some of the disputes were centered around interpretation of specifications, or just actual, if you were to read the words of a specification, how we decided it was going to apply was completely different than how the contractor applied it, hence your dispute. And one of the things, there were a couple of very specific areas where we, as the legal team, knew that we were not following the specification the appropriate way and that it was in fact flawed. And we would not have won those particular aspects of the litigation had it gone forward. So what we did is we talked with the engineers very frankly about those things, and they took the action to dig into that specification. And because a couple of those were going to be used again in the future, they set up a separate team to go rewrite that specification to eliminate the things that were not clear, or to emphasize the things that what we really meant versus what we wanted to say but didn't, and that kind of thing. So there was a technical exercise as a part of the lessons learned for improving potential future projects that would use the same specification sections.
And how about management involvement? Did you have any lessons learned in, coming through this about management support and involvement in these sort of situations?
Big projects like the one that we had typically have a lot of management support because they're high visibility. And what we also discovered in the process of versus looking at email and a lot of other kinds of things, we discovered that the management support perhaps in some instances exceeded what you would normally expect to have on a project. And by that, I mean, there was probably too much access by the contractor to upper level management. Meetings were being held without contracting officers and cores involved, which leads to miscommunication and managers potentially making decisions or promises on a project that are different than those that have already been made by the project manager and other people who are actually working the project, which creates conflict in the workplace, and contributed to several of the disputes that we had. And so part of the lessons learned was probably a more well-received critique that, hey, management, while we love the fact that you support your people and we want you to keep doing that, we need you to maybe not do those things without your contracting officer and core present, because of this risk of creating disputes or miscommunication on the work site on a daily basis with the team that's being charged with managing the project. And I think under other circumstances, if employees just complained about that, it might not be heard. But as part of this lessons learned, it was actually very well received criticism. So.
That's fantastic. That gives some great, forward movement for how to handle future projects. We've only scratched the surface of this, and we haven't even touched on photographs or emails. Would you mind coming back for another couple episodes as we dive a little bit deeper into these lessons learned after the dispute?
I'd be happy to.
Oh, wonderful. Join us again next time on Between Two FARs.